Recently, there's been a social media trend going around saying that there are two separate Gen Zs. There's Gen Z 1.0 and there's Gen Z 2.0. Gen Z 1.0 being the older cohort of Gen Z. These are likely the folks around age 23 to age 27, around that range. And then the younger of Gen Z, those that are under 22 to maybe around 16, that is Gen Z 2.0. But there's been a lot of discourse about the fact that these two separate Gen Z cohorts are way different. There's so many differences, it's glaring. From political differences to cultural differences, even dating and marriage differences. There are a lot of things to unpack with this one. We're gonna take a look at what this means for our society, what it means for the country, and ultimately what it means for both of these very different Gen Z cohorts. So let's dive into this journalist's post right here. So Rachel here in this post is basically saying Gen Z 1.0, Gen Z 2.0. Gen Z 1.0, that would basically be me and everyone else around that age range. These are the folks that graduated high school pre-COVID, right? These are the folks that had already graduated. They weren't worrying about high school anymore. They're already in college. They're already getting their independence. And then the pandemic happened. And that's exactly what happened to people like me. I was in the middle of going to college. I was, doing the college experience and all that. And then the pandemic happened. It sucked. It was unfortunate, but I lived through it. I was already a young adult and I was past my adolescence phase and all the craziness and uncertainty that brings. So I think that helped a good bit. She also says here that flip phones were before an iPhone and they grew up with Instagram and without TikTok. This is very true. This cannot be even more true. I remember my first phone was one of those sliding phones. I think I got it like in 5th grade, used to contact family and occasionally friends. It really didn't do too much. I think you could play like Madden on it or something, a mobile game. It was the most ashy looking game ever, but it was fun. Didn't get an iPhone until I was late in middle school. So that definitely checks out there. Instagram really didn't become a thing until, again, late middle school. I remember using early Facebook and late elementary school. A lot of people my age, a lot of the older Gen Z cohort experienced that too. So Instagram really was like that first mobile social media that you were using. Not super frequently, but you did use it a lot for occasional posts, maybe like bi-weekly or weekly post. It was a good time. And this is another big one. We started college, the older Gen Z cohort started college in the Trump era. It was, a lot of noise going on. I remember in high school, that's when he was elected. You walked through the halls on that first day, post election night, and there were people crying. There were a lot of people crying in the hallways. Some people were very excited and overjoyed.
Hey, I've been a fanboy since he come down off the elevator. I was, 12, 13, and I was Trump all the way. Everybody made fun of me. This was 2017, and I was privileged to go to a rally. Again, I was like 13.
But the fact that there was a lot of negativity towards that election night, I think really kind of molded the older Gen Z cohort to have a lot of distrust in anything Trump or MAGA related, at least in a good part. And a lot of the statistics point to that fact. And this is a very interesting point here, is that older Gen Z voted for Trump way less than younger Gen Z. So put simply, younger Gen Z, aged 22 to 18, this was definitely their first election to ever vote for a president. They decided to vote for President Trump. On the other hand, older Gen Z kind of stuck with the status quo and voted more progressive, more left-leaning. Something that we've always really seen, right? The younger generation is going to vote for the left-leaning party. But this is something we haven't really seen too often, at least since I think the early Reagan young voters, right? This is something that's been very interesting. So we're seeing younger voters, the youngest of Gen Z, they voted for Trump in droves. Even more so, younger male Gen Zs voted for Trump in droves.
You want to tell us who you're planning to vote for? Trump? Does it feel like more young people are becoming more conservative or trending in that direction?
Definitely. Why Donald Trump?
I enjoyed his policies, and he did treat us pretty well.
Why Vice President Harris?
There's a lot of different theories that suggest why that happened. There's a lot of studies or opinions on why that happened, but we're going to talk about that later in the video. So going back to this post here, Gen Z 1.0. The Women's March, March for Our Lives, climate strikes, Black Lives Matter movements were part of the zeitgeist. Yeah, I think she hit it right on the nail there. I remember in high school, late senior year or junior year, there were a lot of protests going on. There was a lot of walkouts during high school. People wanting to show their outrage for all the shootings that were going on across the country, and a lot of consecutive basis there. So that really kind of molded older Gen Z to have this sort of more activist mentality to fight for more progressive causes. And this happened across the country. We utilize social media like Snapchat and Instagram to kind of rally everyone together, even Facebook for some. We coordinated all this together. Twitter was a huge thing, right? So all these climate strikes, all these school walkouts happened across the country at the same time. And that was led by a large portion of Gen Z at that time. At this time, Gen Z 2.0, the younger Gen Z of today, they were still in elementary school. So they really didn't participate in any of these activist activities. And I remember going to college, and all the right-leaning views were put under the rug. They were not really showcased in any way or form. People that had right-leaning views really didn't want to vocalize any of that stuff, right? And I think that really solidified what older Gen Z was. Older Gen Z were activist type people that kind of took what millennials did and pushed it forward, right? They continued that trend. But then the pandemic happened, and I think that changed everything in so many ways, especially with what was going on with Gen Z. So now we go on to Gen Z 2.0 on this post, right? These are the folks that graduated high school post-COVID. So they lived through high school, wearing masks or doing classes through Zoom or whatever. That sucks, right? They didn't get their prom experience. They didn't get their graduation experience, didn't get homecoming, or, couldn't participate in Friday Night Lights, football, any of that. So these younger Gen Zers, they really got screwed over with a lot of great experiences that really encapsulates the high school experience. They really didn't get to do that. So already they're going to have a lot of disdain, a lot of distrust in the system because hey, they were cheated out of so many different things. It's only human nature to be feeling left out, that they couldn't experience all the great things that high school could offer. And depending on where you are in the country, these mask protocols and social distancings, all that stuff, it could have lasted anywhere from 6 months, 1 year, and in some places 2 years. So it really, I think, created this counterculture, like this journalist Rachel is saying.
Is Gen Z 1.0. They graduated high school before the pandemic. They had a flip phone before an iPhone, and they grew up with Instagram, but without TikTok. They started college in the first Trump era. This is Gen Z 2.0. They graduated high school after the pandemic, or they may still be in high school. They only know smartphones and a world where TikTok is the status quo. Gen Z 1.0 were getting a taste of adulthood pre-pandemic, meaning they were living on their own, maybe with friends, they were in college, they had experienced a bit of independence. For Gen Z 1.0, resisting meant resisting Trump's first term in office. The Women's March, the March for Our Lives, climate justice, racial justice, it was trendy to be a part of these movements. For Gen Z 2.0, when they were in elementary school, middle school, and high school, it was COVID-19, missing their proms, football games, or soccer games, or sporting events, whatever it may be. As a result, they've grown to be really distrusting of institutions. If they were going to resist authority, it meant resisting Democrats. We've seen many members of Gen Z 2.0, that younger cohort, start to shift to the right. It's critical to not treat Gen Z like a monolith.
So you have this ultimate blend here, right? You have distrust in the system, you have a lot of anger and frustration that they were left out because of this pandemic that came out of nowhere, right? And on top of that, they grew up way more with smartphones. They really didn't get the flip phone experience. They didn't really grow up into having a phone. They just got a smartphone like that. And yeah, it might just be a few years difference, but having a smartphone makes all the difference here because it gave them access to the entire world of social media. And most importantly here, TikTok really grew in prominence. I remember when I was in high school, TikTok wasn't a thing. You know, what the heck was TikTok? That didn't happen until I was in college, you know, in the post-pandemic era. You know, that's when TikTok really blew up. And it blew up also due to the fact that Gen Z, the early Gen Zers, were stuck at home. So they needed an outlet, and TikTok was the perfect tool for that reason. A lot less Facebook, a little less Instagram, and a whole lot more of Snapchat and TikTok. This is how the younger of Gen Z communicates. Not even so much calling or texting. You know, it's a lot of Snapchat, it's a lot of TikTok. And the younger of Gen Z, they started college in the Biden era. Now Biden, love him or hate him, and he was someone that didn't have too much charisma, very easy to pick on, and I think the younger of Gen Z had someone to blame here for, you know, this entire pandemic happening and for them to being left out of so many experiences. For the younger of Gen Z, you could easily point the finger at the Democrats for you not having that high school experience, not having that full-on college experience, having to go through all these drills and social distancing, everything that is just making your life so much harder and making you not live the life that you wanted and what your older siblings or even your parents did. It created this huge counter movement. And this is her last line here is resistance to COVID and masking protocols. A movement more towards free speech. MAGA and Trump were the counterculture. And I think that's exactly right. That's exactly what we saw. And we saw many social media influencers jump on that Trump train. And they took all their followers with them, many of those followers being young males. And a lot of those people are younger Gen Z. So what are we seeing from poll after survey after poll after survey is that younger Gen Z is more likely to be more conservative, while the older of Gen Z is more likely to be more progressive and liberal. This is a very interesting divide, and I just think it really goes to show just how divided the country is, how divided the world really is. Many can argue that the older of Gen Z share way more similarities to younger millennials than their own younger Gen Z counterparts. The pandemic, along with the rise of social media, has really created two separate generations in one. Something that we really haven't seen in the past 50 to 60 years, if you really think about it. You know, there's huge cultural ramifications here as well. Many could argue that older Gen Z most likely will want to go to the movie theater and watch movies, right? While younger Gen Z, they don't really want to do that. They're more likely to spend their time on TikTok or watching their favorite creators or social media personalities. So there's a lot of cultural differences here. The music, a lot of people can argue is different. To add to this fact, although that younger Gen Z is younger, many are reporting that they really don't want to be in a relationship. They really don't want marriage. As a matter of fact, a lot of them want to just be single. So what effect is this going to have on our society in the long term? It's a trend that's been going on throughout Gen Z, but it seems like it's going to accelerate with the younger cohort here. With social media and all these views being out there, it's going to deter a lot of younger Gen Z to date. It's going to deter a lot of them from getting married and ultimately having kids. How is this going to affect us in the long term? And the main culprit, like we always talk about, right, is social media. Younger Gen Z is way more likely to spend more time on social media than their older Gen Z counterparts or other generations. Therefore, they're more likely to be molded into whatever algorithms that they're being shown, whether it be very right-leaning content or very left-leaning content, radical ideas. It doesn't matter which direction. It seems like it's molding the younger Gen Z cohort even more now. You can call them the TikTok generation, but it's ultimately leading to a lot more anxiety than other generations in the older Gen Z cohort. These younger folks are way more likely to experience anxiety, and as a result, it's going to hurt their dating life, it's going to hurt their job prospects, it's going to affect them in a lot of different ways. And there's been study after study that suggests that more social media usage and an excess of social media usage is going to be linked to anxiety in younger people. They were going through the pandemic and living on TikTok during these pivotal years of adolescent socialization. You know, those formative years that really shape who you are. And unfortunately, I think algorithms have created a lot of negative things here. You know, constantly on this channel, we talk about how teachers are feeling overwhelmed and how many of their students are continuously getting worse and worse year after year, more violent, not really wanting to learn. And I think this just really clarifies it, right? There's two very different types of Gen Zs here. And it's going to be a challenge for people to kind of see this difference and kind of treat both Gen Zs, you know, in a different world. They're two different groups. They're not the same. And these data points, these opinions really drive that home. But what do you guys think of this Gen Z divide? Do you think this is blown out of proportion, or do you think we actually have something to uncover here? Let me know in the comments section below. Be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out, and it shines a spotlight on issues like this. And like always, we'll be back with another video. Stay informed out there.